Good morning, buenos días, welcome and bienvenidos. I welcome you this morning with a heart filled with love. I welcome you from our cathedral of peace, from our temple of love, as Reverend Christopher often says. I welcome you from this beautiful sanctuary. And for those of you who have never seen it, and for those of you who miss it, let me show you around. Let me show you the space. I can't believe I haven't done that recently. Look at the beauty of this most sacred space. Look at the light and the colors entering the windows. This place misses you. This place aches because you are not here. This place hopes that you will be back soon. And we hope so too. But for now, I welcome you virtually. Whoever you are, wherever you are from, whatever your theology, whoever you love, you are welcome here. Today is January 10th, 2020. And what a week it has been, beloveds, what a week. Today we are talking about democracy, the power of groups, and the ways in which we can grow and expand spiritually while defending our democracy and caring for the well-being of the whole web of life. I am glad that you are here. I am glad that we are together in community because there is power in people coming together. Because if there is something that we learned from this week, if there is something that became clear this past week, it's the tremendous power of groups. In Georgia on Tuesday, thousands of organizers were able to get millions of people out to vote. And on Wednesday, on Wednesdays, we saw the flip side of the coin, what a group can do. We will be touching more on that later. We also have delightful music from our beloved colleague, Christopher Rowe. Thank you, Christopher. But first, we begin our service by lighting the candles as a sign and a symbol of the light which brings us together. We light the candle of healing peace and pray that healing peace may be nurtured in the hearts of those in this community and beyond these walls. We light the candle of love and compassion and pray that love and compassion may be nourished in the hearts of those in this community and beyond these walls. We light the candle of justice and pray that justice will be known in the hearts and experienced by those in this community and beyond these walls. And we light the candle of community, praying that even when we are spread out from one another, we feel the light that burns within us and connects us to one another and our sacred community. Many of you know that I was born in Cuba 15 years after Fidel Castro overthrew the government of Fulgencio Batista. And so from the moment of my birth in 1974, I saw images of our president everywhere, in posters, in paintings, in murals, on television, at school, everywhere. While we were not allowed to worship Jesus or Mohammed or any other spiritual teachers, we were taught in many ways to worship our president. And so growing up, I was able to experience firsthand what worshiping a leader does to people living under that dictatorship. For the first 21st year of my life, I was able to experience the frustration of having no power to elect a new president, having no power to use our voice, to give our opinion, or to speak up against injustices, because it could cost you your life or the life of someone you loved. One of my last memories from Cuba, one of those memories that got imprinted on my psyche, has to do with that fear. But that memory is also tangled up with another memory, a cherished memory, because as you know, quite often joy and anguish come together. This story comes from my last year of high school, and our town of 40,000 people was receiving a few dozen bicycles from China. And oh, they were beautiful, shiny, new, modern bicycles. Not the old ones, the broken ones that people had in Cuba from the 40s and 50s. These were sleek, shiny, beautiful bicycles. Now, since this was the early 1990s in Cuba, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, our country had lost the economic help from the Soviet Union, and it was virtually impossible to find gasoline anywhere. And so getting from one place to the next was a challenge. And even if you were lucky enough, one of the few lucky ones to have a car, it was probably decades old, and we didn't have AutoZones to buy the parts we needed. So in this town of 40,000 people where I lived, with the transportation issues we were facing, a few dozen bicycles were a blessing beyond measure. And the whole town was talking about it for weeks with anticipation. Who would be the lucky ones to receive the shiny new bicycle for free? A gift from the government. And somehow I was one of those lucky ones, except it wasn't luck. My professors in school were asked to recommend students to receive this blessing, and I was chosen. I remember that I couldn't sleep that first night. I was too overjoyed. I was too excited. You need to understand that I never had toys growing up. And between my family being poor and me being the youngest of 3 sisters, I got a lot of hand-me-downs. But this blessing, I had earned this word blessing. So for days, I would ride my bike around town, and people would turn their heads, and they would point, and they would say, "Congratulations." And I was so proud. Until one day, a member of our family who was speaking up against the government was taken to the local police department, where he was interrogated, tortured, and he was told that if he didn't stop expressing his opinions against the government, a car could hit me, the girl with the new bicycle, riding around town. And they say no one would ever find out who had done it. This is just one of the many incidents why my family applied for asylum in the United States and how we became refugees here in 1995. 5 years later, the moment I could, I applied to become a US citizen because I couldn't wait to participate in a democratic process. And I have voted ever since. because I believe that the power of the people is stronger than the power of one individual. The power of groups is something that I feel passionate about. I briefly touched on this subject in a previous sermon about belonging, but it is a topic that we don't talk enough about, in my opinion. Because like I said earlier, if there is something that became clear this past week, is the tremendous power of groups. As I mentioned in Georgia on Tuesday, just last Tuesday, thousands of organizers were able to get millions of people out to vote, to participate in the democracy. And on Wednesday, we watched in shock the acts of violence committed in our nation's capital by a group of people who do not support our democratic process. My fascination with groups have led me to look into the work of Edward O. Wilson, a biologist and researcher from Harvard University who has been studying for decades and decades the biological origin and evolution of social behavior. His work has awarded him the Pulitzer Prize not once, but twice. Wilson, who has been called Darwin's great successor and the original ant-man, speaks about the tension between individual selfishness and group cooperation, and points towards altruism and collaboration as hallmarks of our evolutionary history, social history. He also points us towards the work of David Sloan Wilson, who has studied groups that work. And he has found that while it is true that selfish individuals often win against an altruistic individual, it is also true that groups of altruistic individuals usually win over groups of selfish individuals. Let me say that again. He has found that while a selfish individual often might win against an altruistic individual, it is also true that groups of altruistic individuals usually win over groups of selfish individuals. And this is where my hope lies, in many altruistic people coming together to counterbalance the harm done by groups of selfish people. But we need to cultivate that altruism inside ourselves, and we need to promote it and teach it in our society. What is altruism again? I have spoken about it before, but as a reminder, altruism is a benevolence, a goodness inside human beings that makes us delight in the well-being of others. In very simple terms, beloveds, altruism is the work of love in this world. Altruism is any action you take that benefits other people without necessarily benefiting you. Altruism is our investment in alleviating the suffering of other human beings and other sentient beings. And many spiritual traditions promote this, particularly Buddhism. Which reminds me of a Buddhist prophecy that I would like to share with you today. This version of the prophecy was written by John M. Gerber from the University of Massachusetts, and it was inspired by the work of Joanna Macy, the author of Active Hope. It is called the Shambhala Warrior Prophecy, and here it is. There is a prophecy that emerged from Tibetan Buddhism about 1,200 years ago. The Shambhala prophecy says that there will come a time when all life on earth is in danger. In this era, great barbarian forces will rise, which have unfathomable destructive powers. New and unforeseen technologies will appear during this time with the potential to destroy life on earth. In this era, the prophecy says, When the future of sentient life seems to hang by a thread, the kingdom of Shambhala will appear. However, the kingdom of Shambhala is not a place. It is something that exists in the hearts and the minds of the Shambhala warriors. And these warriors are not of supernatural realms. They don't wear special uniforms or have titles or ranks. In fact, they are very much human. And on the outside, they might look like the barbarians, but they hold the kingdom of Shambhala inside themselves. Now the time comes when great courage, intellectual, moral, and spiritual courage is required of the Shambhala warriors. The time comes when they must go into the very heart of the barbarian power, into the tall buildings, offices, factories, and citadels of learning, the places where the weapons of destruction are made, and they have to dismantle them. The Shambhala warriors have the courage to do this because they know that these destructive weapons are mind-made. That is, they are created by the human mind, and they can be unmade by the human mind as well. There is this lie that the barbarians are telling, the lie that these weapons are the inevitable result of progress. And that lie must be exposed by the Shambhala warriors. The Shambhala warriors who know that the dangers that threaten life on earth are not visited upon us by any extraterrestrial powers, satanic deities, or preordained fate. The dangers arise from our own decisions, our own lifestyles, our own relationships. They arise from within all of us. The Shambhala warriors go into the corridors of power, armed with only tools that the barbarians don't understand, and for which there is no defense. The tools of the Shambhala warriors are compassion for all and knowledge of the connectedness of all things. Both are necessary. They have to have compassion to do this work because this is the source of their power, the passion to act. It is said that when you open your heart to the pain of others, the pain of the world, you can move and you can act. It is said that when you open your heart to the pain of others, the pain of the world, you can move, you can act. But compassion in itself is not enough. Compassion alone can burn you out. You need the other tool. You need insight into the radical interdependence of all things. How we are all connected with one another. How we are a part of the whole web of sacred life. With that wisdom, you know that the work is not a battle between good guys and bad guys, but because the line between good and bad runs through the landscape of every human heart. With insight into the profound interrelatedness, we know that the actions undertaken with pure intent have repercussions throughout the entire web of life, beyond what you can measure or discern. Within each Shambhala warrior, these two tools, compassion and insight, can sustain you as agents of wholesome change in our society. These are gifts to you. These are gifts that you can claim and share in the healing of our world. That's the end of that prophecy. And it sure does sound like the time is now. The time for the Shambhala warriors to repair this deeply divided nation and world. These barbarian forces that are allowing our children to be shot at school, that are killing and terrorizing our black siblings, that are destroying the planet, these forces that oppress the personhood of millions must be stopped. And this is what revolutionary love is about. This is what the movement of loving justice is about. And this is deeply spiritual work. This is the practice of social altruism. This is spiritual work because we know that what leads to freedom, to enlightenment, to transformation is not what we believe in, but how we act. That is what leads to transformation and enlightenment, the actual practice of something. Many of you who consider yourselves as spiritual but not religious understand this. For those of us who consider ourselves spiritual but not religious, we understand that it's not a matter of dogma. It's not about the ideas of God. What matters is our personal connection to that which we find sacred. But this idea is asking us to expand our understanding of what is sacred, to understand the interdependence of the whole web of life. And this expansion, this stretching ourselves to make our circle of concern wider, this is what makes us grow in size spiritually. One of my favorite theologians from seminary, Bernard Loomer, speaks of this. He says, by size, I mean the stature of a person's soul, the range and depth of your love, your capacity for relationships, the range and depth of your love, the capacity, your capacity for relationships. I mean the volume of life that you can take into your being and still maintain your integrity and individuality. The intensity and variety of outlook you can entertain in the unity of your being without feeling defensiveness and insecure. I mean the strength of your spirit to encourage others to become freer in the development of their diversity and uniqueness. I mean the power to sustain more complex and enriching tensions. I mean the magnanimity of concern to provide the conditions that enables others to increase in stature. Should I read that again? I'm going to read that again. That is from Bernard Loomer, a theologian who says that by size, the size of your soul, by size I mean the stature of a person's soul, the range and depth of your love, your capacity for relationships. By size, I mean the volume of life you can take into your own being and still maintain your own integrity and individuality. The intensity and variety of perspectives that you can entertain in the unity of your own being without feeling defensive or insecure. I mean the strength of your spirit to encourage other people to become freer in the development of their own diversity and their own uniqueness. I mean the power to sustain more complex and enriching tensions. I mean the magnanimity of concern to provide the conditions that enables others to increase in stature. How big is your soul? What is the size of your soul? Yesterday was my birthday, and I was contemplating that question for myself as I was writing this. I was wondering if my soul is growing in range, in depth, in strength. You can grow your soul at any age. It is this practice of stretching, of opening up, of creating more space inside ourselves for more people to come in, for having deeper relationships. It's this practice of enlarging ourselves to be able to welcome even the perspectives of others and to feel the pain of others. Is there enough space inside our circle to love others outside our circle? This is the work of revolutionary love, a term coined by the civil rights activist, lawyer, and filmmaker Valerie Kaur. She believes that this is the antidote to the rising nationalism, polarization, and hate in our country. She argues that we must reclaim love as a public ethic. I particularly appreciated her book, See No Stranger, where she explains part of the theology behind revolutionary love, which come from her Sikh faith tradition. She says that our spiritual impulses towards awe and wonder can make us grow in compassion and in love. Here's an excerpt. Wonder is our birthright. Wonder is our birthright. It comes easily in childhood. The feeling of watching dust motes dancing in sunlight, or climbing a tree to touch the sky, or falling asleep thinking about where the universe ends. If we are safe and nurtured enough to develop our capacity to wonder, we start to wonder about other people in our lives as well. Their thoughts and experiences, their pain and joy, their wants and needs. We begin to sense that they are to themselves as vast and complex as we are to ourselves. Their inner world as infinite as our own. In other words, we are seeing them as equal. We are gaining information about how to love them. Wonder is the wellspring for love, she says. Wonder is the wellspring for love, the beginning of love. When we encounter others, instead of judging them, we can say, I wonder, I wonder. And that wondering is the beginning of love, the beginning of getting closer, trying to understand. It's a form of curiosity. When I preach about peace on Christmas Eve, I wanted to talk about that, about asking that question. I wonder what makes my husband feel the dishwasher the way he does. I wonder, instead of calling it wrong. Kaur also believes that the call of love, the call to love others, is ancient. She says it echoes down to us on the lips of indigenous leaders, spiritual teachers, and social reformers throughout the centuries. The founder of Sikhism, Guru Nanak, called us to see no stranger, she says. Buddha called us to practice unending compassion. Abraham to open our tent to all. Jesus to love our neighbors. Muhammad to take in the orphan. The Hindu mystic saint Mirabai to love without limits. They all expanded the circle of who counts as one of us, and therefore who is worthy of our care and concern, who is worthy of our care and concern. These teachings spoke of a common vision of our interdependency, our interconnectedness. She says, you can look upon the face of anyone or anything around us and say, as a moral declaration and as a spiritual, cosmological, and biological fact, you are a part of me I do not know yet. And that is the essence of her book. You are a part of me that I do not know yet. And so we need to wonder about who you are, who the other is, what makes them them. That is the beginning of love, she says. She understands that this love everyone message is quite controversial, quite difficult, quite complex. But as a civil rights lawyer and activist, she's thinking strategically too. She said in an interview that she has learned that there is no such thing as monsters in this world. That there are only people who are wounded, who are acting out of their own insecurity, their own blindness, their own ignorance. And once we get curious about them, we begin to gather the information we need in order to change the conditions that radicalize them. It is how we learn to fight in ways that don't just resist bad actors or remove bad actors from power, but actually change the systems, institutions, and cultures in which they operate. That is not just a beautiful ideal. It makes sense too. She's pretty convincing. She's pretty convincing. And yet, again, it is hard work. It is complex work. It is something to work towards, but it's hard, complex work. Last Wednesday, when the news broke here about the violence in the Capitol, I was in this church building, and I immediately felt the terror creep in my body. A terror I had not felt in decades. The terror that comes when you are a refugee and suddenly fear deportation to the place where your life was threatened. I felt in my own body the collective terror of those who fear for their lives or for their rights, for simply being a person of color, for being lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, intersex, or asexual, or for being indigenous, or a person with a disability. Last Wednesday, we watched in horror, shock, and disbelief as that group stormed into the Capitol building, the symbol of our democracy. We saw the fearlessness, the sheer level of hate, and we were shocked. And so as the events unfolded and continue to unfold, more and more of us are realizing the necessity of putting our values into practice to serve as a moral counterweight to that sheer level of hatred. And again, my hope is in our coming together. In this knowing that a group of altruistic people are more powerful than a group of selfish individuals. My hope is in the Shambhala warriors, in us cultivating compassion and insight in order to dismantle the systems and the forces that keep millions of people from flourishing and that threaten life on earth. My hope is in revolutionary love. But that work requires courage. And courage comes easier for some of us more than others. Some of us have been empowered to raise our voice, to fight for what we believe in, and some of us have not. Some of us have been conditioned to shrink, to be small, to not have a voice. So some of us must work on our courage. And I have another book suggestion for that. Here it is, Finding Inner Courage. Mark Nepo, the author, reminds us that the word courage comes from the Latin cor, which literally means heart. The original use of the word courage means to stand by one's core. This is a striking concept that reinforces the belief found in almost all traditions, that living from the center is what enables us to face whatever life has to offer. He says that to encourage means to impart strength and confidence, to inspire and hearten. So the question unfolds. How do we encourage ourselves, one another, and the world? Beloveds, after everything we have lived through over the last 4 years, after the last 10 months of living through a pandemic, after the many losses we have faced, after the events of this past week, I think we need little encouragement, which again means to impart strength and confidence, to inspire and hearten. So I hope this service has been encouraging. I hope you find courage within your own core and being part of this community. I hope you find your courage and then you can encourage others as well. May we never ever forget the dangers of worshiping one individual, one leader. May we realize that our salvation is in our interdependence. May we realize that our liberation is in the power of a movement, never ever a hero. May we cultivate altruism, compassion, and insight inside ourselves. May we expand our soul and grow in size, in depth, in volume, in strength. May we learn to see others as extension of ourselves, as extensions of what is sacred. May we do the labor of love to counterbalance the hate and indifference that brought us here. May it be so. May it be so. Beloveds, we are closing today not with a benediction, but something better, a commitment from your ministry team, a commitment to the work of the Shambhala warriors, the work of revolutionary work, the work of loving and protecting the entire web of life. But before that, I want to remind you of and invite you to the deepening experience on Zoom following this service. We gather there for 30 minutes of social time and 30 minutes of small group dialogues to deepen our understanding of today's message. So join us if you are willing and able right after this. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of our community. We love you. Take good care. I am Reverend Mariela Pérez-Simons, Senior Minister.
I am Reverend Christopher Rowe, Executive Minister.
I am Reverend Matthew Cockrum, Minister of Spiritual Care and Practice.
I am Greta Seidohl, Minister of Belonging and Community Engagement.
We speak to you today with heavy hearts, filled with sadness and anger. Yet we speak because in times of violence and unrest, we know that silence chooses the side of the oppressor. And so we, as individuals and as a clergy team, we will not be silent.
We condemn and we deplore the acts of violence committed in our nation's capital on Wednesday, January 6, 2021. While the right to protest is a sacred tenet of our nation, that right does not extend to the willful endangerment of lives, brute force, and the armed invasion of the seat of our democracy.
We lament the loss of life and the threat to our nation's democratic practices. Our democratic process, while imperfect, is part of our social contract as a nation. One person, one vote. All votes are counted. In this system, there will always be winners and losers, but regardless of who we voted for, the outcomes must be respected. The peaceful transition of power is essential. And what we have seen in Washington is what happens when peaceful protest is replaced by violent mobs.
We witness and condemn the militarized and white supremacist policing system, which we have witnessed reacting with extreme violence to people of color peacefully protesting, while allowing armed white people to commit acts of violence against our government, all but unchecked.
We recognize that although we come from multiple faith traditions, and though the congregation whose mission and ministries we serve are diverse in their beliefs and in their theologies, we share a common conviction that love, inclusion, and justice are the work of our liberating faith.
We commit to the continued work of dismantling systems of oppression within ourselves and within the institution where we serve. We are ready and willing to join collective, moral, faithful action to defend our democracy.
We call on all of our nation's leaders, local and national institutions, as well as every individual of conscience to do the same.
Beloveds, we are in this together. Let us continue our work of love in this world. There's a lot of work to be done, but we are going to do it together. We're going to do it together.